It's been 8 years since I graduated from college. I went to Cooper Union, a small technical school smack dab in the middle of Manhattan. Going to school in New York City was amazing, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. We didn't have many frats back then, so I was sure to join whichever one I could, just to ensure that I'd have parties to go to and whatnot. I was a relatively normal kid, so it wasn't too difficult to get a bid. Most of the pledge events were pretty tame, but I would soon find out what they were compensating for. I hope I don't get in trouble for divulging the story, but it happened so long ago that I figure it's safe to talk about. I doubt my old frat is still making their pledges do this. I certainly hope they aren't. Anyway, the big thing that we did during our initiation was a subway crawl. I can't remember where exactly this was, but there was an old abandoned subway station that teenagers would typically explore. Our frat would make us enter from one of the active platforms, walk to the abandoned one, take some pictures, and then continue to the next active platform. We'd been given subway schedules to ensure that there was no chance a train would come around while we were vulnerable. We'd have plenty of time to get onto the abandoned platform, wait for one train to pass, and then make it to the next station. I know what you're probably thinking, but no, we didn't have to run from a train. The route was planned pretty well, and we all had a lot of leeway when it came to traversing the track. All we had to do was avoid the dangerous third rail, and we'd be okay. I had been a big fan of urban exploring before college, so this was honestly more exciting than nerve-wracking for me. It was some random weekday at like 3 a.m. when our frat brothers made us go down into the subway. I'm pretty sure they picked this time because trains were very infrequent, and we'd be protected at all costs. There were about 10 of us. I'm telling you, it was a pretty small school. You don't need to know everyone's name, but I should mention that my closest friend in my pledge class was an Albanian dude named Baron. He's the funniest guy you'll ever meet. My friends and I always said he should try and do stand-up comedy. He also smoked a crap ton of pot, which is important for this story. The group of us made our way into the subway unscathed. Baron and I brought up the rear because everyone else was too scared to do so. It was really dark in there, and our frat brothers had only given us 2 flashlights to share. Those flashlights and a single cheap film camera were all we had. At first, I was entrusted with one of the flashlights for being in the back, but I quickly gave it up to one of my pledge brothers who was whining about not being able to see. Not even 30 seconds into the walk, Baron had his first genius idea. He pulled out a pre-rolled joint from his jacket and grinned, motioning for me to stop. "I don't have enough to share," he whispered, flicking his head in the direction of the other guys who hadn't noticed what we were doing. Against my better judgment, I obliged. Heck, when was I going to get the chance to light up in a subway tunnel again? The 2 of us smoked while we watched the other guys travel further away from us, their echoing laughter beginning to fade out. We finished the pot, and we were a considerable distance behind the pack. Baron's stuff was really strong, and I found myself a little more absent-minded than I wanted to be. My tolerance was definitely not as high as his. The 2 of us picked up the pace to catch up with the rest of the group, but Baron noticed something in our way. We didn't have a light, so all we could see was the silhouette of someone in the dimly lit tunnel. I strained my eyes a little more. There was definitely a person in there, just standing motionless in the middle of the track, facing us. It was honestly a little creepy. David called out, his voice piercing the silence of the tunnel. The person on the track didn't respond. Just then, David's voice called back to us from further up the line. The 2 of us froze. This person in front of us was a stranger. As if David's voice was some kind of switch, the person on the track started full-on sprinting toward us. The two of us turned around and bolted back the way we came. Being as high as I was, I felt like I was going to have a panic attack. The figure's sprint was eerily silent, as if we were being chased by a shadow. This guy must have been impossibly light. Baron's grip on my arm tightened, his goofy confidence completely gone. "Faster," he hissed, the fear in his voice mimicking my own. I knew we still had some time before the next train came, but running in the wrong direction just felt wrong. Baron must have thought the same thing because he frantically pulled me to the side, motioning for us to cross the divider onto a different track. In hindsight, we probably could have continued running back to the original station, but I was so high that I just followed Baron blindly. We made it across the divider and sprinted back in the direction of the abandoned station. Things were even more terrifying now, though. We had literally no idea when a train was going to barrel down towards us on this track, but at least we were heading in the right direction, I hoped. Baron's maneuver was enough to shake whoever was chasing us, but apparently, it wasn't. Whoever was behind us also crossed the divider and kept running after us. The problem was, there were only a few places where the divider could be crossed, so we'd have to pray we found another one before a train came. Turning around to the one we just used was no longer an option. My heart was thumping, but Baron and I were able to widen the gap between us and our pursuer. We kept running, looking for a place to cross, but with no luck. Baron started cursing repeatedly, and I started feeling like throwing up. We kept running, still searching for a place to cross. Just then, the track started vibrating, and we could see light beginning to poke through at the distant end of the tunnel. A train was coming. We were screwed. I considered turning around and just fighting whoever was behind us, but then Baron screamed, "Right here," running toward the divider. By some miracle, the next crossing point was right in front of us, and the two of us crossed back to the original track. We sprinted another 30 yards and caught up with the rest of the guys who were on the platform. Baron explained the whole thing while I leaned over and threw up. Not even 30 seconds later, the train on the other track zoomed by. Baron and the rest of the guys were ready to confront whoever was chasing us. No one showed up, though. We thought the worst, but just then, we heard another crazed yell from somewhere in the distance. To this day, I still have no idea how that person avoided the train. We waited for the train to pass on our track and then sprinted the hell out of there. In hindsight, Baron and I probably just encountered some homeless guy who was drugged out and might not have even posed a threat to us. The fear took over in that moment, though, which I guess explains the stupid decision we made to cross over the divider. I'm sure the two of us also could have fended that guy off, but I'm glad we didn't have to. It was junior year of high school and it was the last day of school. A lot of people cut school this day or left early after lunch period. My friends and I were some of the latter. It was a stormy, dark day. A bunch of people from our grade originally planned to hit the beach on the last day of school, but that was obviously canceled. So my smaller core group of friends decided to do something else. There used to be an abandoned elementary school in town that hadn't been used for like 10 years. There were plans to tear it down by the year's end. So, still wanting to do something fun on the last day of school, we all agreed to break into the building and just around exploring. There were no cameras in that old building, and on a stormy day, no one would be outside monitoring the place or anything. So we all left after lunch period. Our friend Darius already had a car and his license, so he drove us all to the abandoned school. The school was in the middle of a neighborhood, not on any main roads for anything. There was a back parking lot covered by overgrown bushes and trees on one side and the walls of the school on two other sides. It was a perfect spot to park and go unnoticed. The place wasn't boarded up or anything, it was just locked up. Darius had a baseball bat in his trunk that he took out to smash one of the windows of the school. I was honestly so nervous that even through the pouring rain, one of the houses over the fence would hear the smashing sound. We all watched and nervously laughed as Darius swung the bat into the window in front of the car. After a few good swings, smashing it, he pushed away the stray pieces of glass stuck to the frame with a bat, and then he waved us over. We one by one climbed through the window into the school. My logic was that the school was being torn down anyway. What's a broken window matter? We all were inside the building now. The window we climbed through was actually one of the windows for a classroom. A lot of stuff was still left in the room, including the desks and some decorations on the walls. Based on the decorations, it looked like we were in a 4th or 5th grade classroom. It was very surreal to be inside of what was once an active classroom where little kids would come to learn, now nothing but a cold, dark, and abandoned room, collecting dust, waiting to be destroyed. The sounds of thunder and lightning outside also added to the surreal feeling of it all. There were no lights on in the building. Power to the place was likely cut completely. We anticipated this, though. The flashlights on our phones were plenty to get around and see. Even without them, it wasn't completely pitch black in there, as even though it was a dark day, some light was still creeping in through the windows and doors. We started traversing the hallways, going from room to room. Each classroom was still full of desks and chairs that hadn't been sat in for probably a decade. We all four were in the same classroom when there was a sound that echoed down the hallway and into the classroom. We all went silent and turned off our lights for a moment. After a flash of lightning, we slowly accepted that it was probably nothing, so we continued on. We just went from room to room as our wet shoes all squeaked on the floors. Sneaking around wasn't really possible. A lot of things in the school were visibly decaying. You could really tell no one had stepped foot in there in ages. As we neared the corner of the hall, I turned around just to look back down the other way. At the doorway of one of the classrooms, it looked like there was something sticking out from the classroom. I asked my friends to also look. Their lights might help see what it was. When all four of us were pointing our phone flashlights toward the door, whatever that thing we were seeing was retracted into the classroom. All four of us quietly went, "Oh," amongst ourselves, and we started running down the intersecting hallway. We stopped when we were far enough away. It seemed we were in the kindergarten wing now. Then we heard another sound echo from down the hallway. It seemed we weren't alone, but who could be in here was the question. The place was locked up and every light in the building was off. The sound scared us into going into the first classroom we could find and shutting the door. It was indeed a kindergarten classroom. We were now concerned we'd get in trouble, so we waited in silence with our flashlights off. The rain was still coming down hard, and there was still thunder and lightning crashing every 20 seconds or so. Suddenly, the door to the classroom clicked open, and someone pushed it as it eerily creaked to a fully open position. We didn't see anyone at the doorway, though, and the hallway was almost pitch black. We all tried our best to stay quiet, and then slowly something appeared through the doorway. It was the shape of a head. We all saw it, and when there was another flash of lightning, we saw what it was. It was, in fact, someone's head looking into the classroom directly at us. I started apologizing for all of us, saying we're leaving. The person at the doorway didn't move. They motionlessly and almost lifelessly just peered around the doorway into the classroom. Darius asked, "Do you work here?" No response. Darius had to this moment clearly. He handed me the bat as he struggled to unlock one of the windows to slide it open just enough to crawl through. He crawled out first, then my other two friends, and I was last. Before I crawled out, I looked back one more time at the head at the doorway. I crawled through as quickly as I could, fearing I'd hear the person run up behind me and grab my legs. Once I was out, I ran to catch up with my friends who were already booking it back to Darius's car. We drove out of there in a hurry and never looked back. The building was torn down later that year and has since been turned into a park. We never got in trouble for breaking in. To this day, we have no idea if that was some kind of worker or just some random person. Either way, it was extremely creepy behavior on their part. My college years were some of the best years of my life. Don't get me wrong, I'm very happy with the life I live, but my memories of those 4 years are eternal. My advice to anyone still in college, don't take it for granted because it definitely flies by. I went to a beach college. Our campus was literally right on the water. This story takes place while I was undergoing pledge with my pledge class. If you don't know, that's basically a full semester of initiation for everyone who got bids to the frat that semester. Most of what happens during pledge is better left undiscussed. Anyway, it was the last week of pledge before we officially became brothers. Typically, this is the week where the fraternity kicks things up a notch, so to speak. For us, it was commonly understood that at some point during the final week, we'd have to undergo the beach challenge. Here's what would happen. The brothers would drive our entire class about 12 miles down the coast on Friday night. Then we'd have an hour to finish a massive keg filled with God knows what. After that, they'd walk us down to the beach, tie all of our wrists together, blindfold us, take our phones, watches, and shoes, and leave us there. We'd have until sunrise to make it back to the house, otherwise, we'd all be dropped. To be completely honest with you, I was pretty nervous leading up to this, but there was really nothing I could do. There was nothing any of us could do. I remember it being oddly chilly the night of, but the excitement of becoming a brother and finally being done with all this nonsense was adrenalizing. The kegs were the easy part. By this point, we were pretty comfortable with divvying up the alcohol and pulling trig if necessary. There were 15 of us. After tying us together, the brothers blindfolded everyone but Cuthbert, who was at the very front of the line. He was to be our eyes, but that's all the help we'd get. Our pledge master was this big Mexican guy named Gideon, but he insisted we all call him Steven, like the restaurant from Breaking Bad. He was a strange dude. He outlined the rules for us one last time, then joined the rest of the brothers and left. We were now on our own. I won't run you through everyone's names, but my closest friends in my pledge class were Cuthbert, Derek, Magnus, and Patrick. I was at the very back of the line, and Derek was directly in front of me. We began walking with Cuthbert leading us. It was hell. Without our phones, there really was no way of telling how much ground we were covering or how much time we had left. All we could do was keep walking. At first, we tried to liven the mood by talking and cracking jokes, but eventually, that got old. After what I'll call 2 hours of walking, we were trudging along in complete silence, with the occasional stop for someone to throw up. I started to dissociate. Even the sounds of the ocean grew silent as I walked along, trapped inside my own head. It was completely silent. Suddenly, I felt a sharp tug on the rope around my wrists. So I took a few big steps forward and stopped, assuming Derek had fallen. Derek was a little more clumsy than most, so this kind of thing wasn't super surprising. I didn't really have the strength nor energy to ask him if he was all right, so I just waited. I must have been standing there like a statue for a full minute. Something felt off. I was just about to say something when the rope around my wrist was pulled tight again. I resumed walking, pleased that Derek hadn't passed out. The trek resumed, and I drifted back into my zoned-out state, feeling terrible. I prayed we were closing in on the final stretch. We had to be. Just then, I took what must have been my 10,000th step, but something was different. Instead of hitting damp sand, my foot slapped the unmistakable thin layer of ocean water. I took a few more steps, and the water got deeper, reaching up to my ankles. I was confused. Why would Cuthbert be leading us into the water? The rope pulled tight again, meaning Derek and everyone else in front of me was continuing to walk, so I did the same. I guess I figured someone needed to wash off their feet for whatever reason. If no one else was complaining, though, I definitely wasn't going to start. The water remained ankle height for a while, advancing and receding with the sway of the waves. Just then, though, I felt the water begin to rise again until it was comfortably around my shins. Cuthbert was definitely screwing with us, which for the life of me, I couldn't understand. Why? Wasn't this stupid activity painful enough? The water was only going to slow us down. Seconds later, I began to pick up on a faint sound in the distance. I craned my ears and began to recognize it. It was the sound of an idling boat engine. As we continued to walk, the drone of the engine only got louder, meaning it was getting closer, or I was getting closer to it. I was starting to get really uncomfortable. The water was almost up to my knees at this point. Finally, I broke what must have been hours of unspoken silence. Guys, what the hell are we doing in the water? I waited, confused as to why no one was answering me. Guys, I asked again in a more concerned voice. Still, nothing. I could feel panic begin to set in. Suddenly, my blindness was suffocating. I had to look around. I reached my wrists up towards my eyes in an attempt to undo my blindfold. As I did so, the rope yanked away from me, forcing my arms back down. I cursed, plunging my head down towards my fingers and undoing my blindfold before the rope could be jolted away from me again. To my horror, Derek wasn't the one guiding me. Instead, I found myself staring at a random middle-aged man holding the frayed end of the rope tied around my wrists. I stared in shock at a severed rope in his hand, and that's when I realized what had done the cutting. A long, rusty kitchen knife sat in his left hand. Past him, there was a boat bobbing in the water, and I could make out 3 more silhouettes towering on board. I screamed bloody murder before he had a chance to react, yanking my arms upward as fiercely as I could. At the same time, I lifted a foot out of the water and kicked his chest with all the strength I could muster. Luckily, the rope broke free from his grip. He grabbed my shirt to try and cushion his fall, but the fabric gave way with a deafening rip. He yelled as he plunged into the water with a huge chunk of my white pledge t-shirt, but I was already moving as fast as I could toward dry land, my wrists still tied. A few seconds passed before I heard a splash from further away. Someone had jumped off the boat. I didn't even look behind me, I just kept moving. I was about halfway to the sand when something whizzed right past my head, maybe a few inches from my right ear. It was the knife. I watched it shoot past me before disappearing into the water. I was in complete shock, but the adrenaline was doing its job. I got to land and, for the first time, looked back. There were 2 men in the water and 2 on the boat. They weren't chasing me anymore, just staring lifelessly in my direction. The closest man was still holding on to the white piece of my shirt that had torn off in the fray. I didn't waste another second. I ran up the beach and made it to the street. By this point, it was past sunrise, but my frat was the last thing I was thinking about. I flagged down the nearest car, and after pleading to use their phone, I called the police. It was no use. By the time the cops showed up, the 4 men were gone, presumably off to wherever in that tiny little boat of theirs. I lied to the cops about what happened, worried that there might be repercussions for the frat. Luckily, they didn't ask questions. I didn't get too much crap from my frat brothers. They were actually more pissed at Cuthbert for not realizing what had happened, even though he swears he didn't hear a thing. After that, I became a brother, and things went back to normal for a while. A few weeks later, a couple of the guys and I were playing beach dice in the sand behind the house when Magnus noticed something in the distance. There was a stick poking out of the sand, and tied to that stick was the white piece of cloth that had been torn from my t-shirt. The design on the ripped stick was unmistakable. It was my shirt. To this day, I have no idea how they knew which frat I was in. My brothers think they might have recognized the piece of my t-shirt, but I have a more sinister theory. I think it's very possible that they knew our frat would be sending us pledges on that beach that night, helpless and blind. I think they very well could have planned the whole thing around that stupid tradition, swooping in and kidnapping whoever they could. I was just unlucky enough to be in the back, which still gives me chills to this day. I still wonder what might have happened to me had I gotten on that boat. The police, as always, were useless. It's been nearly a number of years. They never found anything. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to watch the latest videos.